This is Corolla Digital.
This is We the People. What is wrong with our country? I don't want to believe what you believe, and you can't make. I want to hear why it's bad to feel good. These two political gangs don't have your best interest in mind. Makes me proud to be an American. Makes me even smarter to be off the grid. Stay vigilant, people. Abraham, light up that joint. Today marks 13 years since the tragedy of 9/11, and we still don't know what really happened on that infamous day. Don't the victims, their families, and the American people deserve to know the truth? That's why I'm calling for a new investigation into uncovering 9/11. Today, as part of a two-part series on 9/11, I've invited on someone who isn't afraid to ask the tough questions in regards to the biggest tragedy on American soil. But first, let's go to my Vigilant Producer Alex Logan with the latest.
Well, Governor, we've been covering the abuses of our law enforcement, and there's an interesting new aspect that the Washington Post just uncovered. Cops are seizing billions from motorists who are not charged with any crime. In the Post's investigative report, they found that in the past 13 years, over $2.5 billion has been seized without search warrants or indictments, and despite a federal ban, hundreds of state and local departments and drug task forces rely on this seized cash to pay salaries, potentially using it up for 20% or more of their annual budgets. Want to take a guess how the police have been able to take this money without charging the citizens with crimes?
Well, wait a minute. First thing I'd like to know is, isn't that robbery?
Well, it's not robbery when the police do it, right?
I don't know. But if they don't charge you with the crime, as you said, and they don't have a search warrant, wouldn't that be classified as stealing? Wouldn't they have to charge you with something or serve you with a warrant in which to confiscate anything? I would find that's being a thief.
Well, they're able to tie it up, and part of that is the Department of Homeland Security. They and the Department of Justice spent millions to retrain police officers to be their eyes and ears on America's highways, but their power may have spun out of control as a private intelligence network. Black Asphalt Electronic Networking and Notification System has, and I quote, enabled police nationwide to share detailed reports about American motorists, criminals, and innocents alike, including their social security numbers, address, and identifying tattoos, as well as hunches about which drivers to stop. Now road officers are taking to this online network to compete over who can seize the most cash and contraband and to share trophy shots of money and drugs.
Well, my, isn't it wonderful? We're turning it into reality TV and a game show. Ain't that America? I'll tell you, when I did The Running Man, I never dreamed in the year 2014 that The Running Man could become a documentary. When are we going to get Climbing for Dollars, Alex? Remember that on The Running Man?
I do.
Where they got the dogs leaping at your heels while you're climbing a rope trying to get the money and everything. I mean, this is amazing. No. This is just out-and-out thievery. And because the government's doing it, we're going to sit back and say this is okay, this is not okay. And this is all, again, the end result of our failed war on drugs. Here's another disaster from it. This has been a complete failure. It continues to be a failure. It violates our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, which is the law of the land, and it should be stopped immediately. And I would like to know the conscience of these police officers who do this. Do they really believe they're doing what's right? Are they really believing that they're doing what they swore to do, and that serve the public and uphold the law? And they really believe this is part of it? Taking things from citizens, whether or not you charge them or whether or not you have a search warrant or not. I would say, as I've been saying, we're a hair's breadth away from martial law. And I expect in my lifetime to see it. I expect in my lifetime to see martial law declared in the United States of America at some point. Maybe not tomorrow, but if we keep going down the path we're going down, I'm 63 years old. Hopefully I'll live another 20 for sure. I'm hoping. But I'm fully preparing in the next 20 years to see martial law implemented in the United States of America because all the signs are there. You got police forces now that look like the military. You got McCain and that bozo from Michigan that put on the defense bill that the U.S. military can now operate inside our borders operationally. We're losing our rights. They can now put us under surveillance. They can break into our homes without warrants. What more needs to happen before the public wakes up and sees that they've got us on a road to martial law? And bear in mind, Jesse Ventura is the voice of experience, because I was in the Philippines physically the day Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law and became a dictator. I was there, and I saw the results of it. And they weren't pretty, people. Anyway, go ahead, Alex.
Well, we have some more money trail news, and I doubt this will come as any surprise to you, Governor. The Pentagon can't afford all of the wars we're fighting. According to a new analysis from the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments on the Pentagon's latest spending proposal, the Defense Department strategy calls for spending as much as $300 billion more than Congress has given it. This comes after, as we reported on Off the Grid, that the conflicts in Iraq and with Islamic State are costing the Pentagon nearly $7.5 million each day. In this new report, it was found that the U.S. spends $1.3 billion in Afghanistan each week, and that during the height of the Iraq War, we were spending $600,000 on each troop on the ground per year. So when you take this into account with the funding debacle over the Veterans Administration earlier this year, maybe it's time for an overall budget overhaul, right, Governor?
No, I think it's time for an government overhaul with every elected person in this country. I mean, how many times, what more evidence do you need that we are following the Roman Empire? It's like these guys went back in history and they looked at the Roman Empire and they said, you know what? Here's the pathway to success. Let's take our country, the United States, down this pathway. Because this is exactly what destroyed Rome. Getting involved in foreign wars throughout the planet deteriorated their own economy to the point where they crumbled from within because they couldn't pay for the gas to keep the war machine engine running. And that's exactly what we're going down right now. So I guess I would tell the American people this. Don't bitch when they raise your taxes another 10 to 20%, America, because after all, they're keeping you safe, aren't they? And what price would you pay for that safety? Everything you earn every week? Apparently we will, because we Americans are willing to do it. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, I don't care what they do to me at the airport. They could strip me naked. Just make sure I'm safe. Well, Jesse Ventura don't want to live in a world like that. Jesse Ventura will take his chances. I would rather take my chances and live with freedom than to be locked up like a bird in a cage and be told, well, at least you're safe. And that's exactly what you're looking at. Go ahead, Alex. I mean, how much money? Imagine what we could spend on health care. Imagine what we could spend on infrastructure of our highways, of our ghetto neighborhoods, of all the crap we got that needs work in our own backyard. But no, we're spending $1.3 billion in Afghanistan every week. Anybody see any results? I don't. We spent $600,000 on every guy that we had in Iraq. $600,000. Why didn't we just give every guy $600,000 and let him stay home? Cripe, then people would love to join the military. Join the military and get a $600,000 bonus because we can afford it. I mean, how absurd is all this, Alex? I mean, it gets so absurd you get frustrated even commenting on it. $600,000 for each troop on the ground per year. And yet, what are they paying that service guy a year? Gosh, is he even making $1,200 a month? Is he above minimum wage? I'll bet he's not, because when you're in the service, you're on duty 24/7. So they got to pay you 24 hours a day. There ain't a service guy, unless you're a big shot general, that's making more than minimum wage if you count the full 24 hours as a work day. Anyway, continue on, Alex. I'm on a rant.
Oh, no.
I'm on a roll.
Well, now we're going to check in with a favorite topic here on We the People and on Off the Grid, the NSA. Two memos from 2004 released by the Justice Department shine some light on the National Security Agency's Stellar Wind program, a set of warrantless surveillance and data collection activities that President George W. Bush authorized after September 11th. The memo, written by Jack Goldsmith, the head of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, justified the NSA surveillance with, and I quote, "The president has inherent constitutional authority as commander-in-chief and sole organ for the nation in foreign affairs to conduct warrantless surveillance of enemy forces for intelligence purposes to detect and disrupt armed attacks on the United States. Congress does not have the power to restrict that authority." So what happened to a system of checks and balances, Governor?
Well, not only that, but here they're admitting to you that every United States citizen's a potential terrorist. That's why we're all under surveillance. They're admitting it right in this thing because they're stating that the president is commander-in-chief and sole organ for the nation in foreign affairs to conduct warrantless surveillance of enemy forces. Well, they're doing that to us citizens, so obviously they consider us enemy forces. United States citizens are enemy forces for intelligence purposes to detect and disrupt armed attacks on the United States. So what they're saying is that when the NSA puts you under surveillance, you are a potential terrorist who could commit an armed attack against your own country. So in other words, they're telling us all we're traitors. We're all potential traitors. I think they're potential traitors to the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and they ought to be arrested accordingly, if that truly was the law of our land, which it should be.
Well, this new memo was released previously in 2011, but was heavily redacted at the time. This version is more complete, but still censors what...
Redacted again. Wait a minute, Alex, I got to interrupt. We're redacted again. What the shit don't they give us that ain't redacted? Have we ever gotten a piece of paper from our government that didn't have some type of redaction in it? And why, and again, I'll repeat, why does anything need to be redacted if they're telling the truth? Redaction is only there for lying or for not showing the truth, for withholding the truth. That would be the only reason you'd redact anything. Anyway, I blew up. Continue, Alex.
Governor, what they redacted in this one was what prompted the Justice Department to conclude in early 2004 that one aspect of this program, which collected records about America's emails in bulk, was illegal, even though it permitted other aspects like warrantless wiretapping and the bulk collection of Americans' phone records to continue. Do you think the ACLU should even try to continue and litigate for some transparency here, Governor, or is it just going to be redacted again?
Sure, they should try. They should always. We all have to try. We all have. That's part of being vigilant. If we all throw our arms up and quit, then they win. And we can't allow that to happen. If we do, Tom Jefferson, John Adams, and George Washington will be very disappointed in all of us. So, no, absolutely they should continue. Like I've always said, if you don't hold your government's feet to the fire, you'll get bad government. We must always continue to hold their feet to the fire. Besides, they hate it. They hate it. Why not do something politicians hate? Hold their feet to the fire. They'll hate you for it, and you'll feel good about it.
Lastly, I'd like to read from an opinion piece from the Boston Globe by Michael Cohen entitled 9/11 Did Not Transform the World. Cohen writes, and I quote, "The horror of 9/11 increasingly feels more like an outlier event in global history, a terrible tragedy that bred an irrational response, but not one that transformed the world." Judging solely by these three topics...
Wait, is Cohen another one of these CIA infiltrators into our media? Is he another one of them? I mean, how can this guy be given one shred of credibility if he's going to sit here and tell us that 9/11 did not transform the world? You know, Alex, this is such a statement in stupidity. Jesse Ventura, I don't even want to respond to it. It's so obvious this guy's... How can he possibly say that 9/11 didn't transform the world when we now have the Patriot Act, we have surveillance on American citizens, we have multiple wars we're fighting in because allegedly of 9/11, but it didn't transform the world? And this guy is considered a Boston Globe reporter? I'll tell you what, if I was the editor of that paper and he wrote this article, he'd be fired. Why would I want him on my staff? Anyway, continue, Alex.
Cohen's argument is that the fall of communism in 1989 and after did more to change the world, and that efforts by the World Trade Organization and the United Nations to promote positive changes, such as cutting the global poverty rate in half and having child mortality rates, are more important on a global scale. Cohen writes, if there is any argument to be made that 9/11 was a before and after moment, it comes not from the act itself, but from America's response to it. By attacking Afghanistan and worse, Iraq, by turning terrorism into the defining issue of American foreign policy, by reducing global affairs to those with us or against us, the United States ensured that what should have been a one-off tragedy evolved into something far more insidious, a fact highlighted by the continued violence in Iraq and the rise of ISIS.
Well, at least he got that right, but I would beg to differ on him and state that isn't freedom the most important thing on the planet? And has 9/11 not cost everybody their freedom? I mean, to me, that's the main thing that 9/11's done to us. It's made us paranoid, frightened, and we're no longer free anymore because we feel we need the government to keep us safe. From what? Government, I got news for you people, government can't keep you safe unless they lock you up behind bars. There are risks to this thing out there we call life. When you walk across the street, you take a risk that a car won't hit you. There's risks, and you don't need to be giving up your freedom to avoid these risks. It's all part of living. And I got another bad news for you. We're all going to die someday. Just like in What About Bob? Remember that? When Bill Murray's sitting with the little kid in the bedroom, and the little kid comes to the thing, we're all going to die. There's nothing we can do about it. And he's asking Bob, of all people, Well, that's kind of like I feel here. They're asking me. But, anyway, that's it for this week's headlines. Now I'd like to take a moment to answer a few questions from you in this We the People edition of Ask Jesse. All right, Alex, what do the Vigilant viewers want to know?
All right, well, first off, Francisco Hudson on Facebook responded to our Uncover 9/11 coverage with the following, and unfortunately, he's not the only one expressing these sentiments, so I thought we should address it. Oh my God, it happened, just let it go. Worry more about our current problems than whether or not it was terrorists.
Well, if you take that attitude, they can get away with anything and there'll be nothing you can do about it. People say the same thing to me about the murder of John Kennedy, and I tell them, you better remember something. And I don't know who they is always, but if they can kill the president and get away with it, what can't they do? Well, I guess they can do 9/11. If you can kill the president and get away with it, you sure as hell ought to be able to do 9/11 and get away with it. People need to understand, and this applies to these guys, they're not going by a golden rule. And the golden rule is, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. That's why we don't let it go. We don't want it to happen again. How's that for an answer? Go ahead, next one.
From Tinfoil TP on Above Top Secret, he has two questions. Here's the first. Sarah Palin is not even in office. Why talk about her? Only Congress can impeach, and you have to be a member of Congress for that.
And I agree. But how can you not resist to talk about Sarah Palin? I mean, she says stuff that just forces you to make a response to her. Sarah Palin is like mainstream media. She's begging to be made fun of.
And also from Tinfoil TP, Obama should be sued for a lot of things, but how about just getting him off the golf course first?
Well, first, Tinfoil, you ought to read your history a little bit like we talked about on the first question. Barack Obama has taken 1/4 of the days on the golf course that George Bush has taken in the same amount of time. So if you want to talk about a president who initiated 2 wars and then went on vacation during them, let's talk about George W. Bush. And again, I'm an independent. I don't like either side equally. I'm an equal opportunity hater of both political parties. But get your facts straight. George Bush took way more golf days off than Barack Obama has. Next one.
Brother Man on Above Top Secret has some thoughts on the topic of Ebola. The world is changing ecologically and biologically, more than likely due to human intervention, even though we may not have a scientific theory or method to show that. But maybe our planet is fighting back against us. Maybe nature is fighting back.
It goes right to what George Carlin said. George Carlin said the only reason humans are on the planet is because Earth needed plastic. Earth can't make plastic on its own. So the Earth needs plastic. So if planet Earth decides to shed and get rid of us, guess what, planet Earth? You ain't never going to have no more plastic again for as long as you exist. Now wait till planet Earth has to deal with that possibility. No plastic? Are you kidding me? Next one.
Sublime Craft on Above Top Secret says, since it's fairly evident that the police force is not all of a sudden going to be demilitarized, even if the general public was to offer gumdrops and lollipops, the only other option is to fight fire with fire. That's why the U.S. government wants Joe Public's guns.
That's one reason why, absolutely. And for those of you that doubt me, I'll refer back to when I was in the Philippines when Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law and made himself a dictator. His first thing Ferdinand did, I believe he gave the people of the Philippines, it was 10 or 15 days, whatever it was, to turn in all guns or it was the death penalty. First thing the dictator did. Now, I always tell people, why would that be number one? Why would disarming the public be number one on a dictator's list? Well, guess what? Your government here, even though we're not a dictator, they can still behave like one. So absolutely they want to, he's right on with that. If you disarm the public, and also remember this, in the last century, everywhere where genocide took place in the world was in a country where there was heavy gun control. Then you have the ability for governments to commit genocide, where they can kill masses of people without any resistance because the only thing the people have to fight with are rakes and shovels. Now, we'll continue on. People say, well, how could we stand up to the mighty U.S. government with just our guns we have? Well, remember this. We dropped more bombs on the Viet Cong of Vietnam than we did Europe in World War II. All they were some rice farmers with some AK-47s. And our whole U.S. military with all that bombs could not defeat them in a war. We won every battle, but we could not win the war. Because what won the war? The heart and soul of the people won the war. And you can't beat. Always remember this. No matter what armament you got, you can't beat the heart and soul of the people. You can kill them, but you can't defeat them.
Well, Robert in Virginia asks a pretty important question. Governor, what do you mean by vigilant? And how can vigilance recover our stolen, fading, and forfeited liberties?
What do I mean by vigilant? What I mean by vigilant, Robert, is pay attention. Now, here's why. You work half your life for the government. They take your money. When I work a 5-day work week, 2.5 days of that work week goes to the government. They take my money. So therefore, shouldn't I be vigilant and know what they're spending my money on? Yes, I should. If there was any other entity that took half of your money, if you came home from work with your paycheck and some other entity took half of your paycheck, wouldn't you inquire as to why? Wouldn't you inquire as to paying attention as to what they're doing with half of your money? Well, that's what the government does. That's what vigilance about. And it also comes back to my old thing. If you want good government, you must hold their feet to the fire. That's what being vigilant's about. So if you want bad government and you want them to win, then don't be vigilant. But otherwise, it's your job. It's what you're supposed to be doing. And if you're not vigilant, you're not doing your job, Robert.
Ray in Colorado asks, are you kidding me? What can legitimize the independent party more than the $1 bill with George Washington's face on it? He set the precedent for the independent party. If you can't get on the ballot in all 50 states, Jesse, then we need to abolish the $1 bill.
I'm not going to comment on that. It's just a funny statement that he made. But, I can't get on the ballot in all 50 states. So, I guess they need to put my picture on the $1 bill. Then I would be in all 50 states. Keep going.
Jason from Ontario, Canada asks, to prevent election fraud, can local government pass legislation to make only a valid U.S. passport the mandatory requirement for voting eligibility?
Absolutely not, because there's not much voter fraud. When are people going to learn this? Do you think organized crime goes out and says, we want to create some voter fraud here? They did studies when I was governor in the state of Minnesota. Voter fraud is like 1/10 of even 1%. You're lucky if you find 5 votes in an election that are fraudulently cast. There is not this huge block electing anybody with voter fraud. It's a big red herring. It's much ado about nothing. And no, you shouldn't have to need a passport to go vote. Vote's a right that every citizen in America, our country, and our Constitution provides that right. And voting should not be difficult. It should be the opposite. It should be easy to do. I think personally that we should have one national election day a year, and it should be a holiday. That way there is no excuse for not voting. They should but only one day a year. And if you have to get rid of another one, fine. Get rid of a president's birthday or whatever. But I think it's that important that in November, one day a year, that when we have a national election, all elections should be held that day, local, regional, statewide, national, and that should be a holiday. So that way we, the American people, have virtually no excuse for not going out and exercising, but it shouldn't be difficult. Shouldn't need to have a passport to go vote. Come on. What's next? A passport to go from Minnesota to Iowa? Get ready, because that's probably on the horizon too. I've been out there. They got immigration stops now. That's unconstitutional. But anyway, the rant's over. What's the next one?
This is the last one, Governor, and here's a great one from David Giles in Colorado. I want Alex's job. I will do it for half of what you're paying him. So what do you think, Governor? Am I worth double?
All right, this guy wants your job?
Yes.
He wants to put up with me every day?
For half the money, too.
Find out whether this guy's... Alex, I think that we got to find out if he's tough enough as you. Look what I put you through to get this job. People don't know what you had to go through to get this job. I made you stay up for 3 days. I exercised you for 3 days, made you swim in the ocean, did all this stuff in the middle of the night. These people have no idea what you did to get this job, Alex, because you had to stand out in my eyes that I could trust you at command center. So I think people need to understand first, they got to get by Jesse Ventura's screening process before they would ever dream of being a job working with me. I do that with everybody that works for me because I don't trust nobody. Thanks for your questions and comments. Keep sending them to Aura TV, and maybe I'll answer your question on the air on We the People Are Off the Grid. Now it's time for this week's guest, author, collaborator, and I might add, very good friend, Dick Russell. He's the author of 12 books on a wide variety of subjects, ranging from the mystery of who killed President Kennedy to saving endangered ocean species. He's my frequent collaborator. We've written 5 books together, 4 of which are New York Times bestsellers. And he has a new book coming out in the fall, a memoir called, quote, My Mysterious Son, about seeking alternative ways to deal with mental illness. Welcome, Dick Russell, to We the People podcast. Good to have you here with me today, Dick. I haven't seen you for a little while since the Baja.
I know, Jesse. Good to be with you today. Yeah, I didn't make it to Baja this past spring, but hope to be there this coming year, and we'll get to spend more time together. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, but I'm not going to sit down and do another book for a while. I'm booked out.
I understand what you mean. We'll get back to it.
All right, I'll leave the writing to you on that one. And you got a new book out now, of course, called a memoir called My Mysterious Son, Dick. What's that book about in a nutshell?
It's coming out the end of this month, Jesse, and it's a very different kind of book for me. I've never written a very personal memoir. I've mostly been an investigative journalist, and in this case, I spent a long time sort of probing to try to find out, what I could about the relationship with my own son. And he's in his mid-30s now, and he's doing well, but he suffers from a mental illness. He had a breakdown when he was 17. We went through a period of some years of really tough times in and out of hospitals, and but it's the story not just of that, but then of a transformation that really occurred when I took my son Franklin to Africa, to East Africa, in the beginning of 2012 to see the wildlife migration there. And my son is biracial, and being in an African environment was really quite amazing. We went through a lot together, and then we got into sort of, I guess, what I'd call a shamanic quest together, where I began looking for alternatives to just the medication regimen that mental illness people suffering from it usually have to go through, and my son still takes his. But that maybe there was something else we could do together that would make a difference in his life, and so I believe it has, and that's the story of this book.
Well, good. I'm looking forward to coming out and reading it. Now, Dick, You've covered the gamut on being an investigative reporter. I mean, you're one of the premier writers on the murder of John F. Kennedy. Let's get right to the nitty-gritty, Dick. And all of you've studied the Kennedy killing probably as much as anybody on the planet. Do you buy that Oswald acted alone?
I sure as hell don't. In fact, I'm sure of it. And we've talked about it. Our last book together was a summary of all the reasons, 63 reasons to believe there was a conspiracy, and came out last fall. They killed our president. I think it's just out now in paperback. But before that, I'd written 2 books on the subject, and I'm absolutely convinced, and I interviewed probably more people as a journalist back in the 1970s than anybody else, certainly at that time, and I had some really good sources, a number of people that I at first believed and then came to dismiss, as not really telling the truth, but it's a very mysterious and dark, tangled web indeed, but I came away convinced that there were elements of the CIA, anti-Castro Cuban exiles who were posing as Castro agents, and some probably peripheral mafia and big right-wing oil money involvement, and that Oswald was just what he said he was when they arrested him that day inside the Texas Theater, that he was a patsy, and he was set up to take the fall.
Now, let me ask you this, Dick. Why, in your opinion, is mainstream media completely reluctant at all to go beyond the Warren Commission? I mean, it's like mainstream media, the Warren Commission is it, nothing else can be looked at. What do you think is the reason behind that, why mainstream media will not open its eyes to all these other facts?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of shocking, especially when you realize that the media never even mentions the fact that in the late 1970s, the congressional investigation, the reopening of the case, concluded that there probably was a conspiracy, but still, the Warren Commission is what's still always held up as the last word. And I think it's probably more than one thing. I mean, the media's very establishment, the Washington Post, New York Times, CBS, from the very beginning, they would never investigate this. Perhaps they were told not to, or some of the top people were, and some of the top people at these organizations had ties of their own to the CIA. I mean, C.D. Jackson, the publisher of Life magazine, was, a former CIA officer. But I think they probably felt, let's just not look into it. Let's accept the official version because that's what we're told. And, we don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to make people think that anything like a conspiracy to kill a president could happen in this country.
But what happened, Dick, to the point when journalists did rock the boat?
Yeah.
That was part of their job. Our forefathers, that's why they supported the free media, because journalists were supposed to rock the boat.
Sure, they were considered the fourth branch of government, and you did see that in Watergate to some degree, and there was a long tradition of investigative reporting in this country, back to I.F. Stone and many other great journalists. But I think something changed with the Kennedy assassination. I mean, they just backed away and got afraid and didn't. And now that all these years later, they don't want to look at it because they'd have look at the egg on their face. I mean, although more and more evidence has come out indicating there had to have been a conspiracy of some kind, no matter which kind people may think it was, they don't want to look at it because they never would look at it, and it was left to independent journalists, myself and Anthony Summers and many others to take a long look at this and try to, figure out what really happened. And so I mean, these days, the investigative reporting is it's like a dead art or science. I mean, you just don't see it much anymore, except on the internet. I mean, certainly the big papers of and networks have cut their staff, and it's all pablum and celebrity and all this crap, and they just won't look into things like the Kennedy assassination, or we can talk in a minute if you want about some of the new things about 9/11 that nobody knows about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that would be a good transition right now, being that, it was a decade ago, a little more than a decade ago, of the anniversary of 9/11 again. Now, Dick, when did you first start to doubt the official report on 9/11?
I honestly was suspicious way back. I mean, there was something about it, even the day it happened. And people can say, well, you're a conspiracy nut, whatever, but something seemed not right about the whole thing. And then immediately they come out with this guy Bin Laden, and then of course it was used as justification to invade Iraq, even though Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with it and didn't have weapons of mass destruction. But it was convenient, it was convenient for the Bush administration to move forward in these terrible wars that we got involved in, first Afghanistan, where Bin Laden supposedly was, and then Iraq. And at the same time, there was evidence coming out, which is public knowledge, that Bush received a memo in August of 2001 that said Bin Laden is, among others, are prepared to mount attacks on the U.S. It was ignored. A lot of things weren't investigated. And go ahead, Jesse.
Let me ask you this, Dick. Now, obviously, let's say their story is true and everything they said about it is correct. What troubles me then is, since they defeated our multi-billion-dollar air defense system so easily,
right?
Here's a question that I've always entertained: why was nobody fired? I mean, there's certain jobs in government where the cliche failure is not an option.
Yeah.
And I would think air defense is one of those where failure is not an option. And yet nobody lost their job because of 9/11. In fact, people were promoted.
Exactly.
But nobody lost their job. And I've always maintained, here's the reason why. And I want you to give your opinion on this. I think the major reason nobody lost their job over 9/11, which certainly people should have, but they didn't, is because if someone gets fired, they start talking.
Right.
And if someone gets fired, investigations start. Well, wait a minute, I want an investigation here. I only did this because so-and-so told me to do it.
Right.
And investigations begin. And I think the big reason nobody lost their job on 9/11 because of it is because they didn't want any investigations to ever take place on 9/11.
I would say that's probably right. I mean, look back at it. There were no jets scrambled that day to go after these planes that were attacking, four different areas of the three different areas of the country, and two buildings in New York, of course. And coincidentally, there were these war games going on through NORAD that were speculating exactly the same kind of thing that happened. Nobody found any black boxes anywhere from these planes. That's kind of weird. But looking at it today, and of course there was one investigation, so-called investigation, the 9/11 Commission. But now even the chair people of the 9/11 Commission and the congressional investigation, which took place a while ago and then was whitewashed, say it's implausible that the hijackers acted without some kind of government backing. Now, the thing that has come out recently that is buried on the back pages, I mean, nobody knows about it really, is that this the 800-page report that came out through the 9/11 Commission, 28 of those pages, full pages, were censored. No explanation given by President Bush. The text is just blacked out. There's about 7,200 words missing, and a couple of our lawmakers have seen this, have been allowed to read it. And they say they're absolutely shocked at what they describe as the level of foreign state involvement in the attacks. Well, who is that foreign state? Happens to be our oil ally, Saudi Arabia, which of the 19 hijackers, of course, 15 of them were Saudi nationals. I mean,
now, Dick, let me interject here. Okay, Saudi Arabia, it appears, with this redacted stuff, was involved in some way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and if they were involved, of course, they were friends of the Bush family too. Let's look at that.
Oh yeah. Well, being if they were involved in some way, don't you feel we have the right to know that? I mean, here's the thing that always gets me, Dick. Whenever they redact things or hide things, if they're telling the truth, there would be no reason to do that, would there?
That's exactly right. But so what are they covering up?
Exactly. It's that simple. If the truth is what they told us, they shouldn't have to redact or cover up anything.
No.
So clearly it shows you that they're lying to us, because why would they have to redact things, not allow us to read stuff? Like in the case of Kennedy, you can't get Lee Harvey Oswald's tax return because of national security.
After all these years, after more than 50 years.
Yeah, you can't see it. And so to me, people must really be ignorant to believe there's not more to it, or why wouldn't they let us read it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, finally, people should know this. There's been a bipartisan bill introduced by Congressman Walter Jones, he's a Republican from North Carolina, and Stephen Lynch, Democrat from Massachusetts, to declassify these 28 pages of the joint inquiry that implicate the Saudi government, because all these.
Let me ask this, Dick, quick.
Yeah.
Why would the Saudis want to take part in an attack on the U.S. at the Trade Center? Do you have any idea? Why would the Saudis participate in something like that? What is the end game for them?
Well, we don't know, but I mean, if the Saudis are involved, and then suddenly all of these Saudis are flown out of the country, which they were on a chartered plane that an FBI document says might have been chartered ahead of time by Osama bin Laden. I mean, okay, and the Bush administration flies all these guys out of the country, Prince Bandar and many others, within a week after 9/11. I mean, what the hell's going on? I mean, somebody in the U.S. government, if it's the Saudis themselves alone, is protecting them for some reason. And, that raises all kinds of questions in my mind. I mean, who is really, was it some kind of concocted plot between some people inside the Bush administration and the Saudi government? I mean, that I think, as with the Warren Commission situation, a real investigation could open up some cans of worms here that people just don't want to go there. So you're not going to see the New York Times putting this story about this particular redacted report on the front page, and yet Senator Bob Graham of Florida is saying, there's evidence of this. There's a foreign government was assisting these terrorists, and I mean, the evidence is really quite striking. And this has just been coming out strongly this year, that some of the leading, Graham and others are talking about.
Do you believe, Dick, that there is a chance that if they do follow this trail through Saudi Arabia, that ultimately the trail could lead right back to us?
Sure, there's a chance of that. I mean, yeah. I mean, the Saudis that were involved, apparently, some of them had very close ties to the Bush family, going way back. And I forget the name of the company right now, but there was a company that the Bushes had, or Bush Senior had, that had a lot of ties to Saudi Arabia. And so, yeah, I mean, where could it go? I mean, somebody's afraid of this, and there's so many indications that in different parts of the country, L.A., San Diego, Washington, Sarasota, Florida, Falls Church, Virginia, there were, a lot of ties between the hijackers, or the guys that were named as the hijackers, and the Saudi government. And these were not just, low-level Saudi people. I mean, these were high-level diplomats and intelligence officers that helped the hijackers both financially and logistically. And it's pretty incredible that this is not being looked into. But, it's not incredible when you think of where the media is at in this country.
Okay. Tell us about this gentleman, Charles Lewis. You had a chance to interview him. Tell us, who is Charles Lewis, and what did he have to tell you about 9/11?
Yeah, Charlie Lewis. He's out here in Southern California, and he'd been working at LAX, at the Los Angeles Airport, International Airport, as a quality control manager, and a lot of his duties involved security in the airport operations area. So he was there the day that 9/11 happened. He told me that he thought he got there around 6:35 in the morning Pacific time, shortly after the second plane hit the World Trade Center, and he was listening to all this chatter on the security walkie-talkies, and he said the first thing he noticed was that the guards were really upset and agitated because apparently nobody from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, had notified the North American Aerospace Defense Command people, and they were wondering, why not? And eventually the word came back that NORAD, as it's called, was notified, but they had been ordered to stand down. This is what Charlie Lewis heard. So LAX security wanted to know, well, who could have made that order, and word came back that it was from the highest level of the White House. So that's what Charlie Lewis heard about a stand-down order, and it was confirmed by Norman Mineta, who was the transportation secretary at the time. He heard about it. He was in the underground bunker area with Dick Cheney, and after Mineta overheard this young guy talking to Cheney and asking, for some reason, do the orders still stand? And Cheney says, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? So what orders are we talking about here? Well, something very strange was going on that Charlie Lewis was privy to, and high-level people like Mineta were privy to, and we haven't been told the truth.
Now, isn't it true, Dick, that this whole Mineta conversation was then later omitted from the 9/11 report?
Yeah, I believe that's true. In fact, the commission chose to ignore Mineta's testimony. They had him testify, and they removed it from the video archive. And instead, they had Cheney ordering almost 45 minutes later than Mineta said that the inbound aircraft be shot down, except by then all four of the planes had already gone down. So it was a moot point. So there are people in high positions that know that something was weird that day, and you had Cheney in the bunker, and you had Bush reading My Pet Goat to the kids in Florida and seeming like he didn't know anything, and maybe he didn't. I mean, this could have been something that was done without Bush's knowledge. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what happened.
Well, I'll give you a unique scenario too that jumped out at me, Dick. Okay, Bush is now down in the school doing the pet goat thing with the kids, right?
Right.
Well, that was a well-publicized photo op.
Yep.
Because that's what it was. It was a photo op, well-publicized, get photos of George Bush, the president, reading with the kids at school.
Right.
Now, he's sitting there like in Michael Moore's film when you watch it in Fahrenheit, and word comes through Andrew Card that the United States is under attack.
Right.
Now, here's my question. The Secret Service, with orders, they are there to protect the president over his objections. Who in the Secret Service knew that Bush was not in danger? How did they allow him to sit at the table there for 7.5 minutes at the My Goat reading, and they had no idea whether a plane could have been bearing right down on that school for all they know?
For sure.
Why? Somebody knew, absolutely, in my opinion, that George Bush was in no danger.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, otherwise, they would have been all over him. So
yeah, I mean, if planes are being flown into buildings and Andrew Card informs the president, Mr. President, the United States is under attack, wouldn't the Secret Service have whisked him out of that school and got him to somewhere of safety immediately? Instead, they sat there while he sat in the chair for 7.5 minutes in a nuclear age with planes ramming into buildings around the world. Obviously, someone knew the president was in absolutely no danger whatsoever.
Somebody within our government. Yeah, that's exactly right.
They had to know it.
It's scary. I mean, I think and there was so much I think that was kind of set up right from the front. I mean, what are the odds of this? We're told that Mohammed Atta, supposed leader of the hijackers, right, that his passport flew out of his pocket when his plane hit the tower and made it, safely through 9,000 gallons of jet fuel, and then landed on the sidewalk where it was found 1,000 feet below. I mean, perfectly intact, proving that, this guy was obviously a terrorist.
And yet the black boxes allegedly were destroyed.
Yeah, the black boxes, they were never recovered, I guess.
Right. So the passport, the paper passport survives.
Right.
But the indestructible black boxes get destructed.
Does that make any sense? I mean, it just defies the imagination.
Actually, I'd like to add, though, I interviewed a gentleman on conspiracy theory named Mike Balone, and Mike was part of the cleanup. He spent literally almost a year cleaning up, and he and another witness uncategorically said they were there the night they found 3 of the 4 black boxes. They saw it.
Wow.
He said they were put into black vans and the boxes were whisked away. Mike told me, he said, I have no idea what happened to them after that, but this one particular night, he said, I knew absolutely that they discovered 3 out of the 4 of them at the site. And he said, what happened after that, I have no idea. And I have no reason to doubt Mike Balone. He's dying today. He's one of those people that's a statistic from being there cleaning it up, who's affected by all the toxins and all that happened. But they wrote an amazing book, Mike did, where they talked only about the cleanup, and every story in the book is written by 2 people so that you know the story is accurate. And he and the other guy wrote their chapter was the night they found the black boxes.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many unanswered questions. I mean, it cries out for a new investigation, which people, should be raising Cain about and trying to force the government to do, or somebody to do.
Dick, do you really believe in your heart there will be another investigation?
No, I don't. I mean,
I don't either.
I mean, they put it to bed, with the 9/11 Commission. But, even though you've got these guys who were part of that, Bob Kerrey, he was a 9/11 commissioner and a senator, and he said in a sworn declaration that the Saudi government is linked to the attacks and wants these pages declassified. And Bob Graham, who was, major guy on the commission. So you got people connected with it talking about it.
Dick, let's speculate a minute here. Let's say they show us the redacted pages and these guys are successful in producing them. And let's say it incriminates the hell out of Saudi Arabia. What then?
Yeah, what are we going to do? Dump our oil ally? I mean, it's a little late. If this is true, that high-level Saudi officials were involved in this, then it's an act of war. It's not just terrorism. We should have, that's the reality of the situation. But were we going to do that? No way, and we wouldn't do it today. So, this is our vaunted ally. I mean, don't you think that'll be the reason they keep them redacted? They're going to say we don't dare allow this, or the American people, this is an act of war, and they will question why we were attacked in an act of war and we didn't respond appropriately. So it's better we just keep it on the QT for all concerned. Don't you think that's the way they'll try to handle it? Oh, sure, because, look at history. I mean, the Warren Commission, I believe that the Warren Commission was told. I mean, Earl Warren was an honorable man, he was a Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, but I think they were told that if the truth came out, now this was a lie, and they were told this by the CIA and the FBI, that there were, there was evidence looking like the Russians, certainly the Cubans were involved in this, and if the truth came out, then, there'd be a World War III. Well, the Warren Commission, believing that they had to protect the American people, would have just gone to great lengths to make sure that only Oswald was the lone assassin. Now, I'm not saying the Russians and the Cubans were involved. I'm saying they weren't. But the people who were behind it made it look that way in order to head off a legitimate investigation by the Warren Commission. So, yeah, same situation back then as we would, in a sense, that we would find today, different players, but it's not that different.
See, that's what I fear is happening. These guys that will try to bring this out, all of a sudden they're going to be derailed because they're going to be told things like that look, if you bring this out to the public, this could lead to World War III and the repercussions will be worse than anything. It's better to let the sleeping dog lie. And that's why that's why I don't believe for a minute that we're actually going to see these redacted pages intact and that we'll be allowed to read them word for word as to what they say. I just do not. I will be the first one to admit on Off the Grid that I'm wrong, and I hope I am. I hope I can happily say, Dick, boy, was I wrong on that. We got to read every word, and now we know what happened.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid you're probably right. I mean, they've gone to Obama. The Department of Justice under Obama ruled. They filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court where they argued that this lawsuit that had been brought by the families of victims who were killed in the 9/11 attacks, and the lawsuit was against Saudi Arabia, should be thrown out of court. Now, the Supreme Court reversed that decision, but Graham, the Florida senator who co-chaired the congressional investigation, he's been lobbying Obama for years to release these 28 pages and reopen the investigation, but has been stonewalled about this. So it doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, what the situation that you outline is exactly, unfortunately, what we're looking at. And I don't know. What do we do? What do we do about it?
Yeah. In your opinion, Dick, what's the biggest omissions from the 9/11 Commission report?
Oh God, there were so many. I mean, certainly the way the buildings came down. I mean, you've looked at some of that with Building 7.
I personally think, the fact that they could totally ignore Building 7.
Yeah.
The third building that went down at 5:20 in the afternoon and was never even struck by a plane, and it doesn't even warrant a mention in the entire 9/11 Commission report. I found I found it astounding. To me, that's the biggest omission. How could a third building go down and the people assigned to investigate it doesn't even make it into the report? In other words, they didn't even bother with it?
Yeah, and that's because if they did look at it, they'd probably find that this was a controlled demolition. I mean, that's really what happened, and they don't want to look at that.
Yeah, what I found great was when we were doing conspiracy theory, we actually found a British reporter from the
BBC.
BBC, there we go, thank you.
BBC, yeah.
Yeah, she worked for the BBC, and we actually had the tape of her for 7 minutes talking about how she was reporting back to England, how a third building had collapsed, it wasn't hit by a plane, and that it was 49 stories, went down in 7 seconds. She goes on for 7 minutes until the interview ends. The entire time she's doing it, Building 7 is still behind her and it hasn't collapsed yet. On the tape, it's got the time, 4:50 p.m. Building 7 didn't collapse till 5:20. So 30 minutes ahead of time, she is already giving a report on this collapsed building. And when we went to the BBC wanting to interview her, we were totally stonewalled. They wouldn't let us talk to her. They said, nope, you won't talk to her. Everything was hectic that day and blah, 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 and that's all we have to say.
I'm sure they don't want to talk about it. I mean, it's just...
But I mean, doesn't that at least warrant a question of this woman? Who told you? Obviously, you're from Britain. You don't know the layout of the Twin Tower area, so you didn't know the building right behind you was actually Building 7 and it hadn't fallen yet. Who told you that it had? I would love to get her response of what person had credibility enough that she didn't even bother to check. Obviously, this person had high credibility. Otherwise, the reporter would have checked to make sure it was true. But because the credibility was so high, she didn't even bother with it, and she reports on an event a half hour before it actually happened.
Mind-blowing, isn't it? It's mind-boggling.
Oh.
I mean, it's just astounding. I mean, there's one thing that's going on right now, which probably is not going to come to fruition, although one hopes it would. But there's a fellow in New York, a group there called the New York City Coalition for Accountability Now, and a fellow named Ted Walter, and he's trying to get the public, get a ballot initiative on the ballot in New York called the High Rise Safety Initiative that would examine various building collapses and look into how the destruction of Building 7 can't be explained. He's got 100,000 signatures to get this on the ballot, but he was unable to do anything like this before. So I'm sure the New York officials are not excited about this as a possibility. But still, it's something people should know about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, this marks the 50th anniversary right now, Dick, of the release of the Warren Report, which, of course, people now hold in great doubt. Do you ever think we'll see a shift like that on the 9/11 report also? Because most people today really do question the Warren Report. Do you think at some point they will really question the 9/11 report too?
it may happen. I mean, especially if in 20 or 30 years this 28-page redacted section of the 9/11 report is supposed to be released, but 20 or 30 years is a long time. But once that happens, of course, people are going to go, "Gee, I didn't know about this. That the Saudi government may have been linked to the attacks." I mean, it could be. But, all these years after the fact, what are you going to do? So many people are dead, and certainly in the Kennedy assassination, just about everybody who could have talked is gone. And some people, of course, have talked and or tried to talk and been killed for it, including a number of mafia people.
Sure. You know what I found astounding on Kennedy, when I was doing the episode on Kennedy, when I interviewed St. John Hunt, who had actual film tape of his father, E. Howard Hunt, confessing to his knowledge of the murder, confessing and naming the people in the CIA who were involved in it. When we got that, I was so excited. I thought, my God, my TV show is going to be headlines across the country. We got an actual confession to the murder of John Kennedy. The show comes out and there isn't one word even said about it.
Not a word. No.
Not a word. Here's E. Howard Hunt from Watergate fame. This guy is a legit CIA agent involved in the Bay of Pigs, involved in Watergate, involved in who knows what all E. Howard Hunt was involved in. And he has credibility for that type of work. He openly admits to the plot to kill John Kennedy on his deathbed, and that doesn't even warrant a mention in mainstream media.
Let alone front page news. I mean, he used to be front page news in Watergate when he was involved in that. But I mean, it's disheartening. It's more than that. It's disgusting, really, that the lack of concern over the direction of the country and what's been happening actually ever since November 22nd, 1963, when Kennedy was assassinated, and it's pretty tragic that. And especially that people just sort of are so anesthetized and immune to this.
You know what else I'd like to see looked into? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right on this too. These 19 Islamic hijackers that allegedly did 9/11, isn't it true that 3 or 4 of them are still alive, that they weren't part of it?
I've heard that. I mean, so...
I've heard they came forward in Saudi Arabia and said, wait a minute, that's not me, I'm here. And now,
they were identified in one way, but it's not true.
Yeah. Shouldn't that alone be a new investigation? These people are still on the list of doing it.
Yeah, and yet they're alive and well.
Yeah, and they're alive and well, and they're in Saudi Arabia, and they weren't even here. And yet nobody thinks that itself should warrant an investigation? How you can accuse someone of mass murdering 3,000 people, and then when you find out the guy's still alive and didn't do it, shouldn't that be an investigation in and of itself?
Sure. I mean, how did they come up with all those names so quickly? People should think about that. They suddenly knew who all these guys were, and even if they used false names,
Dick, they couldn't stop them, but immediately after they knew all about them.
Exactly. Now that doesn't make too much sense.
Exactly. Plus the fact that these guys were supposed to be Islamic radicals, they hardly behaved like people who were devout followers of the Islamic faith.
Oh no, they were drunk out of their minds. They were, messing around with prostitutes.
Yeah, they did drugs, they drank, they did all this stuff. Now, an Islamic radical who is that true to the Book of Islam and the Quran, I find it astounding that they would behave in such a manner. But then again, we've had our own, haven't we? Who was it? Jimmy Swaggart. He was supposed to be that way, and wasn't he convorting with prostitutes down in New Orleans? I remember when he was bawling on TV, those big crocodile tears. Oh, forgive me, I've sinned.
Yeah.
So I suppose you could look at it and say, yeah, they're religious radicals, just like the ones we got here. So maybe they truly are religious radicals, because our religious radicals here don't seem to follow the faith too well either.
No, I'm afraid you're right. Oh, my God. What a path we've come.
Oh, I'll tell you. So What do you think now, Dick? Let's throw this out. We're winding down to an end here, but what do you think citizens should do today who are concerned and want to know the truth? What avenue should they take? What would you recommend?
Well, I think people have got to, en masse. I mean, start, making some demands. I mean, who knows if it'll go anywhere? But if you get thousands of names on a petition, if you get,
and you know what else? I'll take it simpler than that. I think people need to start educating themselves.
They do. Yeah.
I think people need to start paying attention and reading about what government is doing and hold government accountable. Like on my show here, I always finish with the end. I tell people, stay vigilant, because Jefferson, Washington, and Adams warned us the republic would not survive unless we citizens were vigilant.
Exactly. And, one hopes that there's in New York on the 21st of September, there's a huge climate march, and they're expecting maybe 200,000 people when the UN is looking at debating on what countries should do finally about the climate disaster that's facing not only us but the whole world, and that's the kind of thing people are going to have to do too. They're going to have to be willing to get out on the streets and put themselves on the line.
Well, Dick, it'll be interesting if all those people show up. Will they have to run them off with tear gas?
That'll be interesting. I doubt it.
But you know what I learned on that in this past month that I totally did not realize is this: we have signed treaties internationally that you cannot use tear gas on an enemy, and yet we use it. And yet we use it on our own people.
On our own people, yeah.
Dick, I find that astounding how we can...
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, we've signed treaties that tear gas is illegal. If we go to war, you cannot use tear gas on your enemy. But yet here domestically, right inside our own United States, we use tear gas on the Wall Street protesters, and certainly the latest thing down in Missouri, they used plenty of tear gas. Now, you're not allowed to use tear gas against a foreign enemy, a Nazi, or anything like that in a foreign country, but by God, we can sure use it on our own citizens. No problem with chemical warfare at home.
I know. Oh, man.
I
tell you.
I find that just beyond belief, how we can use tear gas on our own people, but we can't use tear gas against an enemy.
I find that beyond belief too. It's
just wild. Anyway, Dick, I want to thank you today for coming on my podcast. It's fun to always talk to you and collaborate with you. We've done some great work, and I'll always enjoy the books we did. They were great to do. And be sure, I might add, people, check out Dick's new book, My Mysterious Son, out in October, and look for the paperback edition of the book we co-authored together, They Killed Our President. That's out right now this fall. And so again, thank you, Dick Russell. Keep up the investigative work, and good luck on this new book that's so personal to you.
Jesse, thanks so much. It's been really good to talk with you again today.
Okay, and we'll see you down in Baja.
Sure will. Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Coming up next week, another big interview for part 2 of our 9/11 special on We the People. Richard Gage, the man behind architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, joins me on We the People. Be sure to go to our website at aura.tv/offthegrid and send in, as always, your questions and comments. And as always, listeners, stay vigilant, pay attention, and you know what? It's good to ask a question every now and then.
This is Corolla Digital.